Have you ever noticed that the moment you begin to change for real, people around you start acting strange? They do not always say it directly. They hide it behind concern, behind jokes, behind subtle warnings that sound wise on the surface, but feel strangely small the moment they leave their mouth. They tell you not to overdo it. They tell you to stay balanced. They tell you not to get too intense, too different, too serious. But what they really mean is much simpler. Your evolution is making them uncomfortable. Your mental shift is exposing something they were hoping not to face in themselves. And that is the first truth you need to understand. A strong mind does not just protect you, it disturbs people. Not because strength is cruel, but because real inner strength makes compromise visible. It makes passivity visible. It makes borrowed beliefs, weak convictions, and half-lived lives visible. The person who begins to think clearly, act deliberately, and stand without apology becomes difficult to control. And people do not fear that because it is evil. They fear it because it is rare. Maybe that is where you are right now. Maybe you have started to think differently. Maybe you have begun questioning things you once accepted without resistance. Maybe you have stopped seeking constant approval. Maybe you have stopped explaining yourself as much. And suddenly the room feels colder. Conversations feel flatter. Some people withdraw, others become strangely critical. And part of you wonders whether becoming stronger is making you harder to love. But that is where most people make the fatal mistake. They interpret resistance as a sign they should shrink. They think discomfort means they are doing something wrong. They take social friction as proof that they should go back to being digestible, agreeable, easy to place. What they do not understand is that discomfort is often the tax you pay for becoming mentally independent. A mind that cannot be easily bent will always create tension in spaces built on conformity. This is why building a truly powerful mind is not a self-help project. It is a break with dependence. It is a break with the need to be constantly understood, constantly validated, constantly welcomed by the group. And that break is not pleasant. It is disorienting. Because for most of your life, you were trained to associate belonging with safety. You were taught to stay legible, stay acceptable, stay within the emotional range that makes other people comfortable. The moment you stop doing that, you discover something very few people are willing to face. Most people do not want freedom as much as they want familiarity. A Nietzsche-inspired view begins there, not with comfort, but with rupture. Nietzsche's work is widely associated with a critique of inherited morality, religious certainty, and herd values, alongside an emphasis on self-creation, individuality, and freedom of spirit. In other words, he does not hand you a softer pillow. He hands you a mirror and asks whether you are actually living from your own center or just repeating what the crowd rewarded in you. And that question is far more violent than it sounds. Because the second truth is this: a strong mind is not built in comfort. It is built in chaos. Not random chaos, not self-destruction, but the kind of inner disorder that begins when your old beliefs stop working and your new self has not yet fully formed. That is the stage where most people panic. They rush to replace uncertainty with borrowed answers. They look for a new authority, a new ideology, a new tribe, a new identity costume. Anything to avoid the nakedness of thinking for themselves. But if you stay there, if you remain inside that internal storm without immediately numbing it, something changes. You begin to discover what in you is real and what was only performance. You begin to notice how much of your personality was adaptation, how many of your convictions were inherited, how much of your confidence depended on context. And that recognition hurts, because it means part of what you called yourself was never truly yours. That pain is not a sign of collapse. It is the beginning of authorship. This is the part ambitious people often miss. They want strength without disorientation. They want confidence without self-confrontation. They want power without loss. But real mental power is expensive. It costs certainty. It costs innocence. It costs the fantasy that you can become extraordinary while remaining psychologically comfortable. You cannot. The stronger your mind becomes, the less you will be able to live on autopilot. You will notice too much. You will question too much. You will feel the deadness in conversations other people call normal. You will hear fear inside advice. You will see resentment inside criticism. And once you see that, you cannot go back. That is why a strong mind often begins to look dangerous, because it stops obeying social hypnosis. Then comes the next rupture: responsibility. Nietzsche's famous God is dead is not simply a celebration of disbelief. In the standard scholarly reading, it marks the collapse of an inherited Christian moral framework and the crisis that follows when old certainties no longer hold. That matters because when external guarantees collapse, so do your excuses. You can no longer hide behind a ready-made meaning system. You can no longer say, "This is just how life is," and escape the burden of becoming. And that burden is terrifying, because now it is on you. You must decide what is worth living for. You must decide what values govern your life. You must decide what kind of person you are willing to become. Most people say they want freedom, but what they actually want is permission. They want someone else to validate their path before they walk it. They want certainty before commitment. They want guarantees before courage. But a mind so strong it terrifies people is built the opposite way. It acts before applause. It chooses before consensus. It creates instead of waiting to be assigned a role. That is why self-created people make others uneasy. They are not using the same emotional currency. They are not bargaining for approval at every step. They are not taking a vote on who they should be. And that kind of independence feels almost aggressive in a world where most people are psychologically outsourced. From there, you move into something even more demanding: self-overcoming. Nietzsche's Bermensch is commonly read not as a comic book superhuman, but as a symbol of self-creation, value creation, and the overcoming of inherited, life-denying frameworks. For your niche, that translates into something brutally practical. You stop asking, "How do I fit?" and start asking, "What must I become?" You stop measuring yourself by the comfort of the group and start measuring yourself by the standard of your own potential. This changes everything. You no longer ask whether your ambition is too much. You ask whether your current life is too small for what you could become. You no longer ask whether people approve. You ask whether your choices are worthy of your higher standard. You no longer ask whether the path feels easy. You ask whether it is forging someone stronger, cleaner, more deliberate. It grows in silence, in rejection, and in the painful moments where no one understands what you are becoming. That is why it feels lonely, but also why it carries power. If you have felt more alone lately, do not assume you are broken. You may simply be leaving behind the version of yourself that existed to be accepted. You are not becoming cruel. You are becoming difficult to manipulate, difficult to reduce, and difficult to bend. Drop yeses in the comments if you felt this isolation. Like if you're done being easy to manipulate. Subscribe. You're building something most people fear.